Good evening and welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night. Hi, good evening. Oh, so good to see you. Welcome. I'm going to see you in a little while. Yeah. We got a lot to talk about. Very good. All right, one more time. Good evening. Welcome to Mining the Riches of the Parsha. Tonight is Thursday night, June 15th, 2023. I'm so thrilled to be with you, and I'm going to miss you for the next 2 weeks. I don't know what I'm going to do. I mean, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to visit with my mother. That's what I'm going to do. But I will miss you, and I look forward to being able to come back as soon as possible. When I was a kid, and we got bored in shul, which happened pretty often, I have to admit. So the kids would go out, and there was a game that we played, one of the games, and the game was called Chumash. That was the name. And the game goes like this. So you know, in a Torah scroll, there's no punctuation, there's no vowels, there are no special characters. It's just the words from beginning to end. There are a handful, throughout the entire Torah, a handful of unique characters. There are a few places where there are dots on top of the letters. There are a few places where a letter is a little bit smaller, a letter is a little bit larger than normal, but it's very infrequent. So the game of Chumash is played like this. You would take a printed volume of the Chumash, the Torah, and you would open it up at random to a page. And depending on what was on that page, you would get a certain number of points. So for example, if you happen to open it to the end of a Torah portion, you got a certain number of points. If you happen to open it to the end of one of the 5 books, so in between each of the 5 books, there are 4 empty lines. Oh, that's a lot of points. If you happen to land on one of the special characters, like a larger letter or a small letter, that was even more points. But the biggest prize, the home run, the absolute achievement is if you would happen to open the Chumash to last week's Torah portion, the Parsha Baloscha, where there are 2 verses, and at the beginning and at the end, there is an inverted nun, the letter nun, which, by the way, looks kind of like a parenthesis, a bracket, almost. An inverted nun. Welcome, so nice to see you in person. And the cholent is here for you. Welcome. It's the only place in the Torah that exists. It's like a weird symbol, character, and it's only this one place. That's the home run. If you get the upside down nuns, the inverted nuns, then you're going to win the game. This is in last week's Torah portion, the Parsha Baloscha. And what I'd like to do tonight, with your permission, I'd like to share with you a famous, momentous lecture that was given by the Rav, Rabbi Yosef Soloveitchik. It's about last week's Torah portion, but it sets the stage for this week's Torah portion, the Parsha Shelach, and then the next Parsha, Korach, and the rest of the Torah. Everything after stems from this last week's Parsha of Baloscha. The Rav delivered this lecture on June 10th, 1974. And he began by saying that this Parsha, the Parsha Baloscha, last week's Torah portion, is one of the most difficult Torah portions of the entire Torah to understand. For 2 reasons, at least 2 reasons. One is that something happens in last week's Torah portion that has never happened in the Torah before. And that is what happens to Moshe. Now, Moshe has been through a lot by this point. He's been through the Egel Hazav, the golden calf, the terrible, horrible, horrible sin debacle of the Jewish people, one of the worst things that ever happened. It threatened to terminate the relationship between God and the Jewish people. But no matter what happened, even the golden calf, Moshe never despaired. He never complained. He was always a calm, positive leader, defending the people no matter what they did. And suddenly, in this Parsha Baloska, last week's Parsha, for the first time, Moshe complains. For the first time, Moshe, instead of defending the Jewish people, accuses the Jewish people. And Moshe says things that he has never said before. He says to God, "Why have you treated your servant so badly? Why have I not found favor in your sight that you lay the burden of this people on me? I'm not able to carry this burden alone. This burden of leading the people is too heavy for me. If this is the way you're going to treat me," Moshe says to God, "put me to death and do not let me see my misery." This is not Moshe-like. We have not seen Moshe with this kind of resignation and condemning the people as he does here. What happened? That's one issue. The second issue, in a sense, is even more difficult, and that is the apparent lack of continuity of the Torah portion itself. There is a lack of systematic development of a theme. What is the portion about? Is it one story? Is it many stories? Because the Torah never tells us half a story. The Torah tells us a story with a development, a theme, a beginning, a middle, and an end, a resolution. But in the Parsha Baloska, we don't even know how many stories there are. And are the stories that we read about, are they complete? Are they part of something else? We don't see any thread of continuity or any unity of a theme in the entire portion. So let's just review very, very briefly the items that happen in the Parsha Baloska. Well, it starts out, first of all, there's something about Aharon and the menorah, but then the sanctification of the Levium, the Levites, they had a certain level of kedusha, of sanctification. Then there's the subject of Pesach Sheni. Pesach Sheni, the second Passover, that is this idea that if a person was not able to celebrate the Passover, by bringing the Korban Pesach, the Paschal offering, on the 14th of Nisan, as is commanded, because the person was ritually impure, for example, or not able to get to Jerusalem, for example, there was such a thing as a makeup. A month later, on the 14th of Iyar, you could bring the Pesach Sheni, the second Passover. Okay. What does the second Passover have to do with Levium? What's the transition from telling us about the sanctification of the Levium, the Levites, to the second Passover? Then we have a description of the cloud and the way that it guided the people on their journey through the desert. Again, where's the transition? What does the cloud have to do with Pesach Sheni? How does it go from one subject to another? Then the Torah tells us in detail about the journeys of the Jewish people through the desert, the order of traveling. Then the Torah tells us about the Chatzotzrot. The Chatzotzrot were two silver trumpets, and they were blown to communicate with everybody in the camp, the Jewish people, when to travel, when to make camp, when to gather, when to go out. Then the Torah goes back to the theme that it just discussed before, the journeying. What's the order? What is the order of the tribes as they get into formation to start traveling? Where's the trend? I mean, but we just had that. Then there's a very strange conversation. And it's a conversation between Moshe and his father-in-law. We know that his father-in-law's name is Yisro. He had more than one name. In our parsha, he's called Chovev, but it's the person that we know of is Yisro, Moshe's father-in-law. Moshe says to his father-in-law, we're setting out for the place which God said, I will give to you. Come with us. Be part of us. God promised to do good things. But his father-in-law says, no, I'm not going with you. I'm going back to my home. Moshe says to him, please don't leave us. We want you to come. But Yisro is stubborn. What father-in-law ever listened to their son-in-law? And then we have a passage with two psukim, two verses. Vayehi bin soa ha'aron. And it was when the ark traveled. Now, we sing that verse in shul when we open the ark and we take the Torah out. The Torah is traveling. Vayehi bin soa ha'aron. And that's the first verse. The second verse, Uvnucha Yomar, and when the ark came to rest, we sing that when we put the Torah back in the ark after the Torah reading. Because we're putting the Torah's resting, we're putting it back in the ark. Before Vayehi bin soa ha'aron, there's an inverted nun. And after the second verse, a second inverted nun, the Hebrew letter nun. Nowhere else in the Torah. It's put there in order to indicate that these two verses are out of context. They're out of context. Well, let me just ask you a simple question. If it's out of context, so put it where it belongs. I mean, why keep it in the wrong place and put these marks? Just put it where it belongs, wherever it belongs, wherever God wants it to be, let it be. But why put it in the wrong place and then have to mark that it's out of context? And then there is the next narrative, which is known to us as Kivros HaTa'ava, the people who desired. Now we're going to discuss this passage. But at the most fundamental level, the people didn't do anything. They didn't do anything. They complained. They didn't commit a crime. They didn't worship idols. They didn't hurt anybody. No immorality. They were overcome by desire and temptation for food, for meat. They were overcome. And they were complaining. Kivros HaTa'ava, the people of desire, which, by the way, it sounds pretty contemporary. A lot of people are like that today. The Rav said this could have been invented today to characterize modern man, the grave of desire which man digs for himself. Or I would rather say, the grave which the desire digs for man, the grave of the voluptuaries, the Rav's words. But we just don't know. It's just perplexing. How many stories is it? Is it one story? Is it many stories? What's the transition? What's the connection? What's the thing? What's going on here? Because every other Torah portion has a theme, a story, there's a beginning, there's an end. How could it be that this is the only Parsha in the Torah that just is so disjointed? Listen to the Rav's words when I was in the synagogue, listening to the Torah being read on Shabbos in the synagogue. I felt as if we were jumping like a bee on a warm, clear summer morning from flower to flower, accumulating the sweet nectar. Is it possible that the principle of the unity of the Torah, the unity of the themes which the Torah develops, was lost in the Parsha Baloscha? The Rav says this is impossible. So then the Rav said, you must understand that my job tonight, he was speaking in the evening, is to restore the unity of this Torah portion. And the Rav explained that this Parsha is one story. It is all connected. It is one tragic story. It is this tragic story that changes Jewish history from that moment onward up until and including today. And the inverted nuns symbolize an inverted historical process. Our rabbis tell us that the punishment in the Parsha Baloscha is one of the worst events in all of Jewish history. So in order to try to understand this, let's go back to the Exodus from Egypt. God said to Moshe, I want you to lead the Jews out of Egypt. And God said to Moshe that the Exodus will culminate in two events. The first will be Matan Torah, the revelation at Sinai, the Jewish people coming to Mount Sinai, and God speaking the Aseret Dibros, the Ten Commandments, that connection between God and man, the closest of which has never existed and never will exist again. That's the first culmination. And then that will be followed by the construction of the Mishkan, the sanctuary. We've discussed this before. The Ramban, Nachmanides, says that the purpose of the Mishkan, which later became the Beis HaMikdash, the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, the function of that was to take the moment of the intimacy between God and the Jewish people at Sinai and elongate it, concretize it, institutionalize it. So it should not just be a fleeting moment that we will recall, but an ongoing connection between God and the Jewish people. That was the plan. Leave Egypt, go to Sinai, build the Mishkan, and go directly into Israel. That was the plan. All right? Moshe comes down from the mountain with the second set of tablets on Yom Kippur. That's what establishes it for us for all time as a day of atonement. The next day, the Jewish people begin the task, the project of building the Mishkan. How long does it take to build the Mishkan? Well, the Torah tells us that the Mishkan was completed and put together on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the Jewish month of Nisan, which means it is a year less 2 weeks than the Exodus. So 50 weeks approximately after the Exodus, the Mishkan is complete. Well, once the Mishkan is complete, that's it. Those are the two objectives. Sinai, Mishkan, done. Good. Let's go to Israel. There was no reason to spend any more time in the desert because the objectives that God had set out had been fulfilled. The Parsha before Baloscha, you remember, was the Parsha of Naso. So that was the 12 princes, the prince of each of the 12 tribes, brought a set of gifts, one on each day. And the first one was on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, the first day of the month of Nisan. So that took 12 days for the bringing of those gifts. Okay. So now it's the 13th of Nisan. Let's go to Israel. No, we can't go today because tomorrow, the 14th of Nisan, we have to offer the Korban Pesach. This is going to be the first anniversary of the Exodus. The 14th of Nisan, you have to offer the Paschal offering. And then at night, you have to have the Pesach Seder. Okay, that's the so the Torah commands in the Parsha the offering of the Korban Pesach. Well, okay. The problem is that when the 14th of Nisan comes and the Jewish people are offering the Korban Pesach, there's a group of people, they were not able, they were ritually impure. So they come to Moshe, they say, what should be with us? It was not our fault that we couldn't offer it. So Moshe asked God. That's when God says, there's Pesach Sheni, don't worry, you make it up a month later. Okay, so now we have, the next passage is the story of Pesach Sheni. So far, it all follows in line. Pesach Sheni is the 14th of Iyar. This is now a year and a month after leaving Egypt. Okay, so now we're ready. So finally, let's go. The Rav said, in a word, I repeat, the two prerequisites for moving on were met on the 15th day of Iyar, a year and a month after leaving Egypt. The two requirements were met. Sinai, Mishkan, done, let's go. How long would it take? Well, it would just take a few days. If you're traveling straight, it would take a few days to get to Israel. All right, take a few days. We have to know. First of all, how are we going to be guided in this journey, this final journey to Israel? So the Torah tells us about the cloud. And remember, there was a pillar of cloud by day and a pillar of fire at night. Why two pillars? So they could travel 24 hours a day, so that they could be led because they're in a hurry. They want to get to Israel. This is the goal we're all looking for. They could travel by day and by night. Now the Torah has to tell us about the marching, the order of traveling. Which tribe was first, second, last, because now they're going on the final journey. And then the Torah tells us about the chatzotzros, the trumpets, because if you're going to travel with so many people, you have to have a system of communication. You got to be able to tell people, go, stop, slow down, speed up, whatever you have to tell them. So the Torah tells us about the trumpets, the communication system. The Rav then said, Torah is not only important to explain intellectually in categories, but also in emotional categories. If you want to understand the beauty and greatness of the Torah, the emotional mood which is created by the reading of the Torah is perhaps more important than the intellectual gesture. So the Rav asks, what is the mood at this moment in the Torah? It's a mood of expectancy, tension. All the conditions are met. The reward is about to be granted. Finally, the promise that God made to Abraham is going to be fulfilled now, right now. The people are on their final triumphant march. In this mood, Moshe is excited. He was expecting great things. And now comes a conversation between Moshe and Yisro, his father-in-law. And that's really an interesting conversation. What was the mood of that conversation? The mood of the conversation is Moshe says to Yisro, this is the final journey. This is the final leg. I'm not asking you to come on one of many journeys. I'm saying to you, this is it. We're entering now. Come with us. Moshe does not say, Ani ma'amin, I believe with complete faith that the Mashiach will come, and even though he tarry, I believe that he will come. I await his coming. No tarrying, no waiting. Im shamoa tishmu, if you listen to what God says, then you're going to, no conditions, nothing. We are ready. This is it. Moshe says to Yisro, not We will set out for Israel, future tense, but we are setting out. This is the trip to Israel. Now come with us. And this conversation between Moshe and Yisro is not the conversation of a son-in-law to a father-in-law. It is not the conversation of one individual to another. This is Moshe as the representative of the Jewish people speaking to the entire world. Come with us. You can join in this messianic vision of an ideal society. The Torah is roomy enough for everyone. You just have to abide by the rules, and you can partake in this majestic, beautiful messianic vision. Come, we want you to come with us. We say this verse on Rosh Hashanah. All you inhabitants of the world who live on the earth, when a signal is raised on the mountains, look, and when a trumpet is blown, listen. This is it. This is the trumpet. This is the signal. Come, we're going now. The Rav says, I read this Parsha, it attracts me. There is something moving, touching. Sometimes I want to cry when I read this Parsha. We are setting out, present tense, now. Moshe was certain at this moment that he was going to enter the land of Israel. Moshe was certain that he and the entire Jewish people would be classified as both the generation that left Egypt and the generation that entered Israel. Moshe was certain that he was going to see, to behold, the words that he uses later in the Torah, Es haaretz hatova, this beautiful land. He's going to see it. Now, later, we know that Moshe prayed to enter the land of Israel, and he was denied. But here, there's no prayer, because there's no doubt, there's no uncertainty. Moshe knows, I'm going into Israel. And at this moment, the whole thing would have been done within a couple of days. There was no need for Meraglim, for the spies, to go and bring back a report of what the land is like. And is it strong? Is it not strong? You only need spies. You only need intelligence if you're unsure, if you have some question. This is before there's any doubt. It's certain. We have it. God promised. We're doing it now. Now. And then the Torah tells us, and they journeyed for a 3 days journey. Rashi, quoting our rabbi, says it was actually the distance of 3 days that took place miraculously in 1 day, because they were in a hurry to get to Israel, and God was in a hurry to bring them to Israel. Now, at this moment, the next verse, Vayihi bin Soa ha'aron, and it was when the ark traveled. I ask you, at this moment, before everything that's going to happen, that we're going to get to in a minute, but at this moment, are those words out of place? Are they out of context? Vayihi bin Soa ha'aron? No. This is the culmination. This is the whole story. Vayihi bin Soa ha'aron. We're going into Israel. These verses are not out of place. There's no reason for an inverted nun. Because if this had happened, Jewish history would have been completely different. They would have entered the land of Israel. Our sages tell us, had Moshe led the Jewish people into the land of Israel, Moshe would have been designated as the Melech HaMashiach, the Messiah. The Messianic era would have begun. The Jewish people never would have left the land of Israel. And Moshe believed with complete certainty and with passion that this is the final march to redemption, to Israel. It's a matter of days. And then something happened. What happened? Well, it's hard to understand. With the sin of the golden calf, we know what happened. I mean, it's also hard for us to understand, but at least we know what happened. Next, our Torah portion, the Parsha Shelach, the sin of the Meraglim, the spies, we know what happened. We can discuss why it happened and what were they thinking, but we know what happened. But what happened? What happened here? And by the way, this is the first time that the Torah uses these words, as I indicated before. The next verse, the people start to complain. They don't have enough meat. Ube'ene Moshe Ra. In Moshe's eyes, it was evil. This is the first time in the Torah that Moshe has ever uttered words debasing and criticizing the Jewish people. This is the first time that Moshe was not the defense attorney, but he was the prosecutor. And this brought the great march to redemption, the imminent great march to redemption, to a halt. The vision of Mashiach, the vision of ultimate redemption, the Messianic era, it now became a distant vision. It's like a star, but it's twinkling in the distance. Why did Moshe feel so discouraged? Why did Moshe not defend the people this time when he had before? What was so terrible about what was going on? Because this incident of Kivros Hatava, of the Jews being overwhelmed, overcome with this temptation for more food and more food, this differed greatly from the sin of the golden calf. The sin of the Egel, we've discussed it many times, but one of the ways to understand is that people were frightened. Moshe was their leader. They expected him back after 40 days. They miscalculated, and they're frightened. Where is Moshe, their leader? So they're frightened. So they made a substitute for Moshe. All right, it's terrible. It's terrible. But there were mitigating circumstances. They were truly frightened. They didn't know who was going to continue to lead them. But this is something else. This is in a completely different category. Because there is something that is a pagan way of life. Paganism. Now, listen please to how the Rav describes this. It's possible for people to live as pagans, the way the Rav describes it, even though no idolatry is involved. There's no idol worship. Paganism is a style of life. Paganism is when a person cries for boundlessness, for unlimited lust and insatiable pleasure, drinking the cup of pleasure to its dregs. The pagan approach to life is the antithesis of the Jewish approach to life. Central to a Jewish approach to life is that there is limitedness. Yes, you can enjoy. We want you to be happy, but there are limits. Paganism is orgiastic and hypnotic. Hedonism. Remember, they didn't violate the sin of idolatry. Because the truth is, idolatry, worshiping idols, okay, again, it's terrible. Don't do it. It's terrible. But it's not something that is sustainable. I mean, once you see that the idol can't do what you think it's going to do, you know, it's just not a sustainable culture, which we see in history. Paganism as a way of life has tremendous attraction for people, even today. So I want to give you an example. This is an example that you may be able to relate to. You may be familiar with this. A few years ago, there was a commercial. It was a brilliant commercial. It was a horrible commercial, but it was brilliant. You may have seen it. It was a commercial for Grubhub. Grubhub is a food delivery service. So the commercial shows a man who is at home alone, and he orders dinner for himself for takeout, for delivery. And the commercial shows him setting his place for dinner that he's going to eat when his food arrives. And he wants it all. So he orders a hamburger and pizza and French fries and fried chicken and Chinese food and sushi. He orders every single food in the entire world. And the commercial shows the quick glimpses of all these different restaurants, hundreds of different restaurants that are all preparing his dinner that they're going to send to him. And during the whole commercial, it's very powerful. There is a very loud rock song going on, very loud. Now, it happens that I love this song. I love classical rock music. I just love it. I don't love the sentiment of this song. I abhor the sentiment of the song, but the song is just great. It's classic. It's Freddie Mercury and Queen singing, I want it all. I want it all. I want it all, and I want it now. And it's this great music, powerful, loud music of Queen singing this over and over. And you see all of these different restaurants preparing these meals, and then the doorbell rings and he opens the door, and there are hundreds of delivery people who have brought him one of every single thing in the world now. And he gets it all, and he gets it now. That is the essence of paganism. Now, in the Torah's vignette of paganism is this narrative of the slav, the quail. The people ask for meat, and God brings them this quail, and the Torah describes the people who were working all day and all night, gathering heaps and heaps of these quails, more than anybody could eat, and they keep gathering more and more. It doesn't matter how much it is, more and more and more. They were mad with desire. There was no controlling, limiting element in their desire for vastness. The more, the better. And you start gathering new goods even before you've completed gathering the other goods. The pagan is impatient and insatiable. That is what the Torah is describing with this scene of Kivros Hatava, the people of temptation. The Torah's approach is exactly the opposite, and it is represented in a different narrative concerning food of the manna. The man was food that God provided to the Jewish people as they traveled through the desert. It was a perfect food. It was delicious. It was nutritious. And everyone had exactly the right amount. No one ever went hungry. There was nothing left over, but there was never too little. That's the Jewish view. Enjoy. It should be delicious. It should be nutritious. You should enjoy it. But there is a limit. How much do you need? And
you have at the beginning of Bereshit.
I'm going to come to that. I'm coming. No, that's okay. That's okay. But
I didn't read
no, someone was looking at my notes. And with that, this great tragedy happens. And this great triumphant final march to redemption to Israel comes to a halt. Because these people demonstrate, the Jewish people demonstrates that they are not worthy to enter the land of Israel. And suddenly, the verse Vayihi ben Saharon is out of place because the ark is not going forth into Israel right now. It's going to be a long time. It's going to be a long time till the Jews get to Israel, and it's going to be a long, long time we're still waiting for the Messianic era. It's at this moment that those two verses are out of place. It's at this moment that the distance to Israel becomes very, very long. Now, the decree of wandering for another 39 years, a total of 40 years in the desert, had not yet happened at this point. That happens in our Torah portion, the Parsha Shelach. But it's at this moment that Moshe knew intuitively that the great march would come to an end, had come to an end, and that he would never enter the land of Israel. And when these verses, Vayihi ben Saharon, lost its place, that's when the two inverted nuns are added. Because instead of this march, Vayihi ben Saharon leading them directly into Israel, it's actually leading them away from Israel, away from redemption. And that's the story of the Parsha. It is one story, one unified story, one unified, tragic story. Jewish history became inverted, and it is still inverted. The Torah portion, the Parsha Vayihi ben Saharon, is still dislocated. Because we cannot say we are setting forth like Moshe was able to say just 24 hours before. The decree of the 40 years had not yet happened. It happens in our Torah portion. But our Torah portion, Shelach, and the next parsha of Korach, the rebellion against Moshe, and the rest of the Torah, all have its seeds in this moment. In this pivotal moment, when Vayihi ben Saharon becomes out of place, unreachable, at least so far. And the lesson for us is that kivros hatava, paganism as an ideology, as a lifestyle, is still prevalent. Maybe more so than others, maybe more so than ever. And we have had trouble with this since the very beginning of human history. God creates Adam and Chava, Adam and Eve. And he puts them in Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. You have everything that you want. And God says to them, you can have everything, every food, every taste, every fruit, everything is for you. Enjoy it, except for one tree. One tree. Let me ask you a question. How many trees were there? I don't know. I guess there were a lot of trees. If they just would have started with the next tree and just one tree a day, how long would it have taken for them to get back to this one tree? It's almost like it's a symbolic prohibition. They didn't need the tree. They had everything else in the world except for this one tree. But this is,
Give me too much credit. I was thinking of Abraham. And it's sort of the opposite of gluttony, how he was running to get food for other people.
okay,
He
that's
wasn't
a good
worried
point.
about
Okay, but let me develop this.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. That's okay. But this first command to Adam and Eve is the most fundamental of God's commands. Every other mitzvah, every other command is based on this. There are limits. The whole world is for your benefit. The whole world is here for your enjoyment. But there are limits. There are limits on what you can take. There are limits on what you can have. There are limits on what you can enjoy. There's plenty left. There's no shortage. But there are limits. And the problem is as serious for us as ever, even in the religious world. I find it very, very prevalent within the most religious part of the Jewish people. I need everything. I need every food. I need every single scotch that there is. I need every single vacation. There cannot be a place on earth that I cannot go to for a vacation. I need every single experience. And if there is some obstacle in Jewish law, we must overcome it because we need it all and we need it now. But we don't. And the tragedy of Baloscha should remind us as we see things fall apart in this week's Torah portion, Shelach, and even further fall apart in next week's Torah portion, Korach, we should remember that this attitude towards life is our greatest tragedy. My friends, thank you so much. I want to wish you a beautiful evening and a great Shabbos. And I look forward to seeing every one of you soon in person.
As we're all